All kinds of weird goings-on happen in the subway, which is what makes it such a natural laboratory to learn all about basic questions of human behavior. There's one study in particular that we're going to tell you about, the subway experiment, that revealed a whole lot about how humans behave, but not at all in the way that the researchers expected. In fact, the people conducting the research ended up, in a weird way, becoming the subjects of their own experiment. This little-known study was conducted by the same man who did a very famous study that almost everyone knows about. And we're going to take you on a little detour right now to let you know where he was coming from.
I would suggest you read the list and the test at a brisk pace to keep it moving. Right? And, of course, we'll begin with 15 volts for the first wrong answer. Okay? Do not begin until I say ready, begin.
It was the obedience experiment. Maybe you saw a film about this in college. If not, here's what it was all about. In the early 1960s, social psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a study in which subjects were asked to give electric shocks to someone in another room each time that person gave the wrong answer to a test question. And the subjects were given the impression that they were participating in a study on punishment and learning, but in fact, it was a study about obedience to authority. Amazingly, every single subject obeyed the command to administer what they were told was an electric shock at increasing levels to that poor guy on the other side of the glass.
Continue, please. Watch. Man, lady, tub, neck. Answer, please. Wrong. Answer is neck. 300 volts.
I absolutely refuse to answer anymore. Get me out of here. You can't hold me here. Get me out. Get me out of here.
Continue. The next word is green, please. Green, grass, hat, ink, apple.
Now, the man who was supposed to be getting shocked, he was actually an actor. And remember, the electric shocks were not real. But the test subjects didn't know this. And the scary thing was that more often than not, they continued to crank up the juice. Or so they thought. Now, the obedience experiment is what made Milgram's reputation as a maverick social psychologist. But in 1972, 12 years before he died at the age of 51, Stanley Milgram directed what became known as the subway experiment. And the results of the subway experiment were somewhat surprising, but nowhere near as surprising as the difficulties that Milgram and his fellow researchers encountered in carrying it out. Next Big Thing producer Curtis Fox explains.
Stanley Milgram had a restless imagination. That's not something you would normally associate with social psychology, what with their fondness for statistical analyses and bell curves. But Milgram was interested in everything, especially in city life and its difficulties and its mysteries.
There are not only surprising places, but just beneath the surface, surprising experiences. Suppose you were tired and wanted a seat in a crowded subway. Too bad, some would say. Everyone knows New Yorkers don't give a damn for the guy who's standing. Really? Let's try an experiment.
The subway experiment was inspired by Milgram's elderly mother-in-law, who complained that nobody ever gave her a seat in the subway. So Milgram wondered what would have happened if she'd asked for a seat. And why didn't she ask for one? Apparently, in her mind, that sort of thing just wasn't done. But why not? Milgram brought these questions to a class he was teaching on urban psychology at the City University of New York. And with the help of 15 graduate students, they devised a very simple experiment. The students would approach people on the subway and ask very politely for their seats, without any explanation whatsoever. The students reenacted the experiment for a short film that Milgram made.
Excuse me, sir. May I have your seat, please?
I guess so.
Thank you very much.
Now remember, these were healthy, young graduate students, well-dressed, very polite, and they approached subway riders of all ages, even old people. And often there were plenty of other open seats to be had in the same car.
Thank you.
This is a pretty standard technique for social psychologists. To learn about the rules that govern behavior, you violate them, and then you see what happens. In this case, the rule is don't ask people for seats on the subway. But Milgram and his students wanted to find out what would happen if they did.
Half of the 200 New Yorkers we asked willingly gave up their seats.
Half gave up their seats, and many others scooched over to make room. This was news. The New York Times ran a headline that read, "The meek inherit the subway seat." The moral seemed to be that New York subway riders well, they weren't really so bad after all. But the film didn't really get the whole story. The best part of the story is actually what happened to the graduate students themselves when they conducted the experiment.
I